On this episode of Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson, we have, for the first time in the history of our show, an exclusive statement from a current sitting governor's office in the United States on a matter that no one in the media, literally no one in the media, is discussing at large, a matter that will profoundly shape our society if it comes to fruition. And that is the details of President Joe Biden's national security interim guidance, which make social justice, racial justice, and other pet social issues a national security concern as opposed to leaving them in the good graces of social institutions themselves. We have a full analysis of the guidance and much more on this episode of Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson. You cannot miss it. Please stay tuned. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. Welcome to Pensive Politics, my friends. We haven't done this show formally in a very long time. And so for those of you who are new, who are watching this, I just want to say thank you so much. Your attention could be anywhere else right now, and the fact that it's here means a great deal to me and to everyone who helps make the show possible. To those of you who are not new, but are new to this kind of format, Pensive Politics is essentially a podcast that I started back in February or so of 2020, and I decided that I was going to take this podcast and translate it into video format, and that's of course where this here came from. That's of course where this YouTube channel came from, and so I am just happy that it ballooned and blossomed into what it is now. It is now not simply a long-form podcast, but it's also a range of videos which really have nothing to do with the podcast itself. But this podcast essentially helped me launch myself into this sphere here. And this podcast has also allowed me to shine a light on some of the issues occurring in American society that are not being discussed from a fruitful lens. And when I say 2020, it's probably 2021. It's been a very long time. When you're involved in these things, it's been a very long time. You get the dates mixed up, but no matter. So, my friends, but the real reason why you're here is to hear about, again, one of the most alarming stories that I believe is transpiring right now in contemporary American politics, that virtually no one, and I mean virtually no one in the media, is contemplating or talking about. The pages are being filled with this great replacement theory stuff, and they're trying to paint people on the right, conservatives particularly, as if they endorse this great replacement theory. The pages are being filled with the Ukrainian plight. The pages are being filled with all kind of stuff. But the important things, my friends, are going under the radar. And before we begin our analysis, this is a broader cultural theme. In this world of clickbait, in this digital age, many people are motivated and moved not by intellection and the pursuit of truth and the understanding of reality, but instead they're motivated and they're moved by what will get them that dopamine rush. They're motivated and they're moved by hedonistic sensibilities. And we all have to be careful about that, because none of us are above that condition. None of us are. And of course, none of us are also above the jurisdiction of the Biden interim security guidance, which is what we're talking about right now. So, my friends, for those of you who do not know what this is, let me explain it very briefly for you. The National Security Interim Guidance is essentially a set of strategic goals that the President of the United States lays out, typically during the first term of his presidency, that essentially binds all of the agencies within the intelligence community that have to do with national security. So the FBI, the CIA, all this kind of stuff, they are governed by these guidances. Now, the interim guidance is essentially a stopgap measure. It allows the president to work on a fuller and bigger, more comprehensive guidance, but while the interval is happening, while the bigger guidance is being created, the interim guidance most certainly rules. But not only that, it's not simply a temporary thing that is removed after the newer guidance is created. No. The interim guidance in and of itself actually, in many cases, translates over into the more formal guidance. The interim guidance shows the president's temperature on some very important issues and then translates that to a more official goal. It's like if someone has a prototype for a car, and the car that comes out of that prototype may not look exactly the same, but in essence, it is practically the same general thing. That's the same exact thing what's going on with this interim security guidance. Now, this guidance, and I understand that a lot of people don't necessarily ponder national security issues in a very deep way or at all. In fact, before a few weeks ago, I didn't even ponder these issues very deeply or at all. I pondered them somewhat, but not very deeply. They were afterthoughts because I'm a human being and my time and my energy is limited, and so I had to focus my energy on different things. But when I saw just how consequential this particular action was to our nation and the persistence of our nation's principles, something unlocked in me, a fury unlocked in me, a fury of passion spring forth, and I said, I have to learn more. I have to pursue knowledge, which is what the philosopher is supposed to do. The philosopher is supposed to pursue knowledge, and I have to get what's going on. I must. But I also understand that it's one thing to critique someone's plan, and then it's the other thing to have your own plan. And of course, this podcast is going to be a critique. I'm going to be critiquing Biden's plan here, but I'm not going to be posing my own plan in this podcast. I'm going to adopt the same strategy that John Locke adopted in the two treatises of government. In the first treatise, John Locke essentially responded particularly to the claims of Sir Robert Fillmore, who essentially was trying to argue for monarchy, was trying to argue for this sort of patriarchal, monarchical rule. And John Locke essentially just spent the entire first treatise, which no one reads, by the way, which is a shame. The first treatise is incredibly important. He spends the entire first treatise just ripping it apart and attacking it and critiquing it. But then he says in the introduction of the second treatise, he said, if it weren't for Fillmore's followers, who are so incessant in pushing his nonsense on the rest of society, I wouldn't have to make this second treatise. But since they are incessant and they want to keep pushing their ideas onto people forcefully, they must be dealt with. And therefore, I'm going to draft up this conception of natural law, natural rights, what it means to be human, the value of individualism, and I'm going to put it here in this second treatise. I'm going to do the same exact thing with how I treat this guidance. I'm going to critique this guidance, analyze it and critique it, but then in a later show, I'm going to come back and I'm going to offer my own framework, my own idea of what national security should look like and what it must look like on the grounds of morality, natural law, that this entire country is based upon. And so there will be a lot of work done to that effect. But for now, my friends, we must deal with what is here. And what is here right now is a egregious intrusion upon social ability to act, upon individuals and their social affairs. I will summarize this document for you before I actually continue. This document, this interim security guidance, and mark my words, make no mistake about it, listen to me very carefully. This interim security guidance is an ode to military and economic interventionism abroad and authoritarianism, both economic and as well as political authoritarianism right here at home. And you will see what I am trying to say in a moment. Even if you don't agree with it, you shall see what it's based upon in a moment. But this document is about 24 pages long, give or take. So we're going to read all of it during this show. And I'm going to stop a lot. I'm going to explain the various parts of it because it's important. And my friends, if you want to go and read it for yourself, then please, I encourage you to go ahead and read it for yourself. It'll be available in the description down below. When this podcast is uploaded as a audio podcast, it'll be available in the show notes. So without further ado, let's actually get into reading and analyzing, critiquing the Interim National Security Guidance, which will eventually become the official national security strategy of the Biden administration, which will essentially dictate even more what this administration considers its national security goals to be. It will mobilize and animate the apparatus that is supposed to be preserving the country, protecting the country towards certain goals that may have nothing to do with preserving the country. Let us read. This is the beginning of the guidance. President Biden, and I don't believe that President Biden actually wrote this. Obviously, it was written by an assistant or an intern, but this has Biden's name on it. So we'll just say President Biden since it's proximal to his name. President Biden says this, okay. This is the beginning of the document. In my inaugural address, I committed to engage the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's. Let's stop right there. Not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today and tomorrow's. My friends, futurism is deadly. Futurism, when it in all-encompassing view of how you see geopolitical issues, or any issue really, and you cannot look back to the roots, that's dangerous. Because this sort of single-minded futurism that's always fixed towards the front, always fixed towards forward, cannot give me an explanation of the roots of certain issues. A lack of first principles in society, in our modern day society, or in general, is what leads to fundamental misfirings in political policy. Lack of first principles is what leads to bad policy. It's what leads to a bad understanding of politics. It's what leads to a bad engagement with politics. And it's also what leads to the ever-increasing expanse of political power on the basis of arbitrary and capricious rules that can be dictated and the foundations of which can be moved at the whim of a politician. What we're seeing here is an affirmation of a kind of futurism. And by futurism, I don't necessarily mean Elon Musk. I don't mean robots and transhumanism, although it is connected to that term in association. I don't necessarily mean that. Those are two different kinds. The futurism of Musk, the futurism of transhumanist, is a very different kind of futurism than what I'm talking about right here. This kind of futurism is a futurism that is single-minded and only uses history as a tool of affirmation for one's individual views and not else. You cannot engage with today and tomorrow without understanding what happened yesterday. Let's continue. Our world is at an inflection point. Well, the world's always at an inflection point. Every moment in our history, every moment in time, is potentially a moment of great disaster or great hope. Which is one of the reasons why I don't like it when historians call the Dark Ages the Dark Ages. I don't agree with that. Because while the Dark Ages most certainly were a time where there wasn't a lot of quote-unquote human advancement, there was still advancement being made within that time frame. And obviously, advancement was made within the end of that time frame, which is what spurred the next historical era after that. It's what spurred other revolutions. So obviously, by saying something is a dark age, we're not actually giving human creativity and human ingenuity a credit. As opposed to saying something was a dark age, which is to say that human beings who existed within the dark age actually brought us out into something better while being within the dark age. This is the ancient question. Can we be in the proximity of evil or the proximity of mediocrity and still maintain the sweetness of our Constitution and still maintain our inherent excellence? This is the assertion that Emerson makes in Self-Reliance. Emerson most certainly says that the mark of a man is he who can maintain his Constitution, the sweetness of solitude, amid the crowd without conforming. Again, we have to go back to first causes and first principles, or none of this will make any sense whatsoever. It'll all be shallow. Let's continue. Global dynamics have shifted. New crises demand our attention. And in this moment of accelerating global challenges, from the pandemic to the climate crisis, to nuclear proliferation, to the fourth industrial revolution, I'll talk about that in a second. One thing is certain. We will only succeed in advancing America's interests and upholding our universal values by working in common cause with our closest allies and partners, and by renewing our own enduring success of national strength. Enduring sources, of national strength. Okay, a few things about this. The fourth industrial revolution. So the fourth industrial revolution is essentially the new era that we live in, an era that is replete with cell phones, with computers, with Siri, with these sort of digital tools that inform how we live. So the fact that you can go in a car and you can turn on your phone's GPS is a product of the fourth industrial revolution. The fact that I can right now sit here with this very decent camera and I could be live streaming if I wanted to, or I could also just record it and then simulcast it other places. That's a product of the fourth industrial revolution. The problem is this, though. These ages of history, right? They're good heuristics. They're good ways to deal with certain things and to group them into something for our own purposes. But we shouldn't use these ages as calls to action, because the progress of the human being is not something that needs to be helped. It's something that happens. And this is essentially a cause to action to utilize the creations of man, to utilize the unlocked potentials of man that have bubbled up in the sort of fourth industrial revolution, that have bubbled up in the advent of Tesla, bubbled up in the advent of the smartphone, iPhone, bubbled up in the advent of Zoom and video conferencing, bubbled up in the advent of technological warfare, and trying to use those and like cat them in a bottle for the purposes of the strategy. This reflects a certain conception of the human being. And some of you may say, Christian, you're going too deep. You're going too deep. I'm not going too deep. The problem is politicians and people in politics don't go deep enough. All of these things that they're mentioning are problems that have multivariate causes, or their situations would have multivariate causes. But it is not sufficient to simply say, okay, they're here and we have to engage with them. No. We have to actually investigate their nature. The climate crisis, like you mentioned, okay, the climate crisis is a very long and delicate thing, which has a lot of contention around it and cannot be summed up very simply. There's a lot of different moving parts. There's geopolitical parts. The fact that China and India are some of the most biggest polluters in the world, and yet China, given its position on these international bodies that Joe Biden wants to prop up, as per this statement and many other statements he's made, and I'll explain that in a second, has the ability to essentially move the chips in their favor. And we're supposed to expect that these same international institutions are going to be able to serve the best interest of America, which in all honesty are the best interests of our founding documents, which in all honesty are the best interests of protecting rights and adhering to natural law. No, you cannot have an adherence to natural law amid all of this chaos here. You just cannot. It doesn't work. Okay. Let's keep going. Also, one thing as well. He mentions as well that we have to uphold our universal values by working in common cause with our closest allies. Well, here's the thing about this as well. America is a fundamentally unique nation. We are fundamentally unique. There's not a single other nation on this earth like us in terms of our fundamental foundational principles, in terms of our respect for the individual, in terms of our reliance on natural philosophy to make our claims. These things are so atypical in the political history of the world that one might even think, if they had heard of the birth of America before America was born, if they had heard that a nation like America exists, they would have said, oh my gosh, no, this is a fantasy. But the thing is, America was built upon truths that all men already knew. The truth that all of us are naturally free. Machiavelli said in The Prince that you cannot suppress a free people because they remember their liberty, so you have to kill them. The Pockblot, the sort of abjuration, released by the Dutch before they came to America, said that when a prince deviates from his role from protecting people and allowing them to act out their liberty and instead begins to oppress them, he is no longer a shepherd, he is a tyrant. And of course, the Packlot precedes the Declaration of Independence. We have so many source documents that prove and exemplify these natural truths. But you cannot expect a world that has been running away from them to understand them or appreciate them or fight with us for them just because we're allies with them. When he says common causes, what Biden really means, what he really means is common geopolitical causes, which are concerned with the machinations and the constructions of his administration, not with the foundational principles of this nation. That's what he really means. Let's continue. So that goal, that begins with the revitalization of our most fundamental advantage, our democracy. I believe we are in the midst of a historic and fundamental debate about the future direction of our world. Let me stop right there. Okay, America is on democracy. We are a republic. We're a constitutional republic. Democracy is susceptible to the flaws of faction, the passions. It's essentially a tool for the most amount of people to rule in whatever way they want to rule. It is not a political structure at all. It is a deterioration of political understanding. It's a deterioration of moral understanding. Democracy is nothing good. We're gonna be here forever. Sorry. But this is what's going into the national security guidance for this administration. This is what's going into the national security guidance. This kind of stuff right here. This should concern you. I believe we are in the midst of a historic and fundamental debate about the future direction of our world. There are those who would argue, given all the challenges we face, autocracy is the best way forward. Now he's making a false dichotomy here. It's either democracy or autocracy. No, it's neither. It's complete and utter liberty of the individual affirmed through a Republican structure. Not a Republican in terms of the party, in terms of the government structure. Autocracy is the best way forward. And there are those who understand that democracy is essential to meeting all the challenges of our changing world. No, it's not. Democracy doesn't the change that democracy allows is the change that the majority assents to. If the majority ever feels threatened by any kind of change, it will not allow that change. So therefore, democracy is only changing in one direction only, and that's not change. That is bondage. I firmly believe that democracy holds the key to freedom, prosperity, peace, and dignity. We must now demonstrate with a clarity that dispels any doubt that democracy can still deliver for our people, and for people around the world. We must prove that our model isn't a relic of history. It is the single best way to realize the promise of our future. And if we work together with our democratic partners with strength and confidence, we will meet every challenge and outpace every challenger. It's interesting. A lot of the nations around the world that are democratic are only so informed, and yet they're replete with a lot of other things that are completely and utterly not democratic or whatever. I mean, you just look at a lot of other countries that we ally with, right? Look at Britain, for example. And I don't mean to attack my English listeners here. This is not an attack against you. It's a commentary on the state of your politics. But over in Britain, there are Scottish YouTubers being jailed and hauled away for saying things that offend people. The amount of the length and width of a knife that you can have is restricted because it could possibly be used as a murder weapon, right? Guns are incredibly limited. I mean, people are banned. Their freedom of movement is stopped because the government disagrees with their political positions. And that's supposedly democratic. See, this is the problem. America is far too unique to be making these sort of broad, sweeping statements like that. But Joe Biden fundamentally does not understand, or at least does not appreciate on a deep level, the uniqueness of this nation. Let's keep going. Achieving those goals rests on a core strategic proposition. The United States must renew its enduring advantages so that we can meet today's challenges from a position of strength. We will build back better. Listen to this. We will build back better our economic foundations, reclaim our place in international institutions, lift up our values at home, and speak out to defend them around the world, modernize our military capabilities while leading first with diplomacy, and revitalize America's unmatched network of alliances and partnerships. We will build back better our economic foundations. Okay, the foundations, my friends, of economics have absolutely nothing to do with being amendable. The foundations of economics are like the laws of physics. They exist, they are observable, intractable truths that exist out there in reality. And yet, in this national security guidance, Biden is saying we have to build back better, which means to reconstruct, to remake in his image, these economic foundations, and then we have to partner with institutions. Okay, so we've got to try to change the laws of economics, then partner with these institutions that operate on a global political scale, many of whom are bound by geopolitical nannying and geopolitical fighting. Look at the United Nations Security Council, for example, as opposed to first principles. And we have to do all of this so that we can revitalize America's place in the world. Does this make sense to you? Does rejecting basic laws of reality make sense to you as a way to revitalize a country that's based on objective law? Does getting involved in institutions, even more involved in institutions that are primarily bound by political jousting and not by first principles, like the United Nations, like NATO, like all these, is that really a recipe for revitalizing America, or to binding us to certain entangling engagements that do nothing to actually help our country's security? Again, this is not a debate about what is geopolitically wise in the grand scheme of things. This is a conversation about what goes towards America's national security. And unfortunately, we're not really seeing anything so far in this guidance that says that actually focuses on that. We're seeing political propaganda, political ideological goals being advanced in the name of national security. And this will become very significant in a second. He then said that, as we do this work, we must demonstrate also clearly to the American people that leading the world isn't an investment we make to feel good about ourselves. It's how we ensure the American people are able to live in peace, security, and prosperity. It's in our undeniable self-interest. No. The way you make sure the American people can live in peace and prosperity is, number one, by actually sticking to what national security is about. It's about defending the homeland, not about doing political activism across overseas. And then what you can also do is you can stop aligning with institutions whose aims are fundamentally opposed to, again, in many cases, the first principles of this nation and the interest of this nation, insofar as they relate to making sure our country is safe. China and Russia playing around in the Security Council is not advantageous to Americans. America getting ensnared into various conflicts around the world due to some treaty we've signed is not advantageous to Americans. It is advantageous to us to align and to ally. We have to ally on our terms. We have to build relationships on our terms. When you engage with these international partnerships, whether it be NATO, the Atlantic Council, whatever it is, you are ultimately fight on their terms. This is why when President Trump said, we don't want to pay so much, we're being robbed in this NATO relationship, everyone got nervous. Because it was true. While the European countries were filling up their population with cushy social programs, America was providing the bulk of the military defense of NATO. It was an uneven partnership. An uneven partnership that presents the illusion of unity and the illusion of safety, but in all reality, hurts American citizens in more ways than one. I'm not saying we should reject all alliances or whatever, and I'm not saying that. What I am saying, however, is that we have to make sure that all national security goals are fixed to a very simple maxim: to secure and preserve the homeland, not to stop potential threats somewhere out there. If we have information on a potential threat, we can get information and we can target that potential threat to stop them before they do harm. But that does not mean being an ever an ever omnipresent presence in every conflict in the world to forestall anti-American sentiment from being able to hurt people. That doesn't work. In fact, in many cases, it actually hurts more. The American presence in Afghanistan and in Iraq actually hurt American perception around the world even more, because there are plenty of people in those nations who had no idea why they were being bombed all the time. Again, this interventionist strategy that Biden is posing is not going to do anything for national security. It's going to hurt it. All right, we're almost at our time. We're going to take a break. When we get back, we're going to be doing a full analysis of the rest of this, most of the rest of this. I'm going to highlight some key parts, and then, of course, you guys can read the rest. We'll be back right here. Roll intro. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson. I've realized, my friends, that our time is limited. I don't want this show to go on for eternity. So what I'm going to do from now on forward, I'm going to highlight key parts of this guidance that I think are important. I'm going to read them, but I'm going to paraphrase the rest, because I want you guys to get the most out of this, because a lot of this stuff, my friends, is just platitudes and noise. A lot of it is just rhetorical fluff meant to make the presidency look good in the media environment and meant to build up their goals as if there's some sort of a grand thing that all of us should be aspiring to, when in all reality, under scrutiny, it fell apart. So I'm going to just paraphrase so we can get through this and get to Governor DeSantis' statement, which he gave exclusively to the Pensive Politics podcast. I am so excited. Let's keep going. Before we get the fun stuff, we got to do the hard stuff. Let's keep going. So, as the guidance actually begins, and as for the introduction, Biden ended it by saying something that's very important. He ended it by saying that he essentially directs all of the agencies within the executive government that have to do with national security to be bound by this guidance, to follow the aims of this guidance. I will say it directly to you guys right now. He says, "Today, I am issuing this guidance to convey my vision for how America will engage with the world. I direct departments and agencies to align their actions with this guidance. Even as we begin to work on a national security strategy, we have no time to waste. The simple truth is, America cannot afford to be absent any longer on the world stage. And under the Biden-Harris administration, listen to this, America is back. Diplomacy is back. Alliances are back, but we are not looking back. We are looking irrevocably toward the future and all that we can achieve for the American people together." Okay, my friends, as I mentioned, this sort of single-minded futurism is not going to help you understand the root of something. It simply allows you to understand what your goals are and how to inflict your goals upon the world without actually understanding the foundations upon which your goals stand. A construction worker who does not understand the foundation that he's going to be building upon is not going to have a sustainable building. Similarly, a politician who doesn't understand the foundation of his ideology or the foundation of his goals is not going to have sustainable goals. Again, this is one of the many issues that this strategy suffers from. And they suffer from it because of the hubris of the Biden administration. This is just so blatantly obvious, my friends. I wish it weren't, but it's so blatantly obvious. Also, the idea of America being back. Listen to me very closely, my friends. America is back. Now, Biden said the same thing in a February 2021 press conference. He said, America is back, and we have to engage in the world once again. And what this really means, once again, what it meant back then, what it meant under the Obama administration, which is where this idea comes from, what it really means is that America is now going to be an interventionist force to further its geopolitical aims through means that the Biden administration or the international institutions that he so kindly defers to determine are necessary and are proper. What do I mean? Well, we have seen a complete and utter shutout, a complete and utter deep freeze of the Russian economy from the West by Western institutions, filtered through these international institutions, led by the United States, led by Joe Biden. And of course, these sanctions are impacting everything from the supply line to the supply of gas. And Biden wants to simply run and say, oh no, it's Putin, without actually realizing that when you you reduce the amount of supply, suppliers have to economize, firms have to economize, and a part of that economization process is going to be increasing the prices. And this is a part, again, of this national security strategy implicitly, because again, America is back. America is going to engage more with the world, which means that things like this can be justified on those grounds. I'm not saying that in every instance, America being back will lead to sanctions and economic turmoil, but what I am saying is that the idea of America being back is open-ended enough to be used for nefarious aims, and I don't like it. America can only be back in a manner that directly serves our interests, not the interests of everyone we have decided is our friend in the world. That's how it has to be if we're going to have any conception, sound conception rather, of national self-interest and sovereignty, by the way. So Biden continues, and this is actually the actual guidance now. That was the introduction, and in the introduction we saw a lot of things. We saw the hailing of democracy as a form of politically virtuous governance, which it is not. We saw Biden essentially say Build Back Better is going to be a foundational part of this plan. We saw Biden say America is back, which basically means that it's an interventionist state now. We saw Biden say that democracy has to be the guiding principle for this action. We have seen in this little introduction here so many concerning things that, again, are not exactly auxiliaries to national security, but rather they are components of a political agenda that may have absolutely really in all reality, has no actual relation to the preservation of the nation in a substantial way, right? The form of the government of the nation, democracy, republic, essentially, it already exists, it's already there. National security strategy is supposed to be an external tool to look at external threats and to see, in some cases, how internal threats also threaten us as well. That has nothing to do with our political orientation as a nation and everything to do with the actions of bad actors. But Biden is putting it in a different place. And that's why this national security strategy has no legs to stand on. He continues. Now, this is the beginning of the guidance, where he actually talks about the threats America faces. Because obviously threats are what we should be looking at, but these are the threats in Biden's words. Today, more than ever, Biden says, America's fate is inextricably linked to events beyond our shores. We confront a global pandemic, a crushing economic downturn, a crisis of racial justice. Oh, here's the kicker, man. It's coming. And a deepening climate emergency. We face a world of rising nationalism, receding democracy, growing rivalry with China and Russia and other authoritarian states, and a technological revolution that is reshaping every aspect of our lives. Ours is a time of unprecedented challenges and also of unmatched opportunity. So notice, nationalism is a national security threat now. The pandemic is a national security threat, which makes more sense, by the way. It makes more sense than nationalism. But then again, it's a virus. It's a sickness. It's a malady that comes from nature. There's only so much that you can do to beat that in terms of a national security. The only thing, really, intelligence, I suppose, would be the only thing that one could do to beat back the impacts of the virus. Intelligence as to where it came from and what have you. But of course, that the origin of the COVID virus is a very long and storied story. There's a lot of speculation. My point is that doesn't really have a lot of national security ramifications, in my opinion. I can see how one can believe it might by saying, well, if everyone's sick, then how can these people work? I get that, but that's a very extreme case. And the fact that the military and everything, they're all vaccinated, a lot of them are young and healthy. Again, I think it's very odd for the president to use COVID as a national security excuse, but I know why he's doing it, and I'll explain in a second. Just keep rolling with me. He begins, he says, the moment calls upon us to lean forward and shrink back, and not shrink back, to boldly engage the world to keep America safe. prosperous and free. Again, this is the idea that America's freedom relies entirely on the state and the condition of the world. That's not true. India and Pakistan will always be fighting, and that fight is a very precarious fight. But America's national security is not inherently concerned with that fight. Our geopolitical interests most certainly are, but India and Pakistan are not necessarily fighting with us. They're not necessarily trying to do anything bad to us. They have a cultural battle. There are plenty of battles happening in the Middle East. Syria, for example. There's battles happening in Syria. There's all kind of things. You have al-Nusra coming back, al-Shabaab, coming back in Africa. There's a lot of things that are happening around the world. Turmoil is endemic to existence. And the idea that we can, if we engage all this turmoil, we just stay in the world like this, we're going to be more secure is a lie. You cannot declare war on natural concepts. This doesn't work. Like terror, we've already seen this. Again, this is a rehashing of the failures of the past presidencies, and it's not even justifying why this is even in this document and why federal agencies are now bound by this stuff. It's astounding to me. He goes on. It requires a new and broader understanding of national security, one that recognizes our role in the world and depends upon our strength and vitality here at home. It demands creative approaches that draw on all sources of our national power, our diversity, our vibrant economy, our dynamic civil society, and innovative technological base, enduring democratic values, broad and deep network of partnerships and alliances, and the world's most powerful military. Okay. So now, national security is not merely about protecting us from foreign threats. It's about using society as a means of doing that. And this, my friends, is why I think this guidance is dangerous. Because now, as opposed to the government being adjacent to society, Biden is saying, no. It is now in the government's interest to be involved in society, to draw upon all these sources of strength for this single narrow-minded focus. It's like saying, let's use a river analogy. It's like saying that we want to use the power of a river with a dam to fuel our houses or to do something that's going to be productive to mankind. We want to use that power. We want to harvest that hydroelectricity with that dam. And you can do that, by the way, and you'll be able to use a certain amount of energy up to a certain amount of point. But if a hurricane comes through and washes away the dam, what happens? Dams break all the time. Why do dams break? Because they're not built strong enough? No. Dams break because there comes a point when a dam simply cannot contain the energy it's brought with. There comes a point where governments simply cannot contain the sheer energy of human beings, of human creativity, human action that it's brought with. And when governments try to do that, that devolves into tyranny and things break down. So just like I don't want the government to be tyrannizing me, I don't want the government to be involved in society for its own aims. I want the government to operate in its sphere of existence, which should be small, unfortunately it's not, in its sphere of existence to execute its very simple tasks ordained by the natural law, that is to protect me, protect my family, protect my property, and ensure this nation is defended. I don't want the government doing social engineering programs or going into society to use it for their own advantages. So, the next part of this document, which is called the Global Security Landscape, expands more into this. He mentions that democracies across the globe are under siege, including our own. And when one asks for an example, Biden says this: how is our democracy under siege? Free societies, which is the exact opposite of whatever this is, right? Then they're in the exact anathema of whatever this is. Free societies have been challenged from within by corruption, inequality, polarization, populism, and illiberal threats to the rule of law. Nationalist and nativist trends, accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis, produce an every country for itself mentality. The glasses are coming off right now. The mask's coming off. That leaves all of us more isolated, less prosperous, less safe. So this belief in not only national sovereignty, but in the primacy of one's nation over everybody else makes us less prosperous and less safe. This is the crux of this guidance. Not only is America going to be involved in the world to stamp out threats, it's going to be involved in the world to supposedly provoke prosperity. Again, this is based upon a wrong understanding of human creativity, human prosperity. The idea that you can bring all these things to the realm of national security without considering their nature is preposterous. Every concept and principle has its own nature that must be considered, and if you do not do that, you do not understand the concept. And also, the idea that nationalism in and of itself is a national security threat just shows that this guidance is about ideology. It's not about protection or security. Nationalism in and of itself, even though I have disagreements with nationalism in some cases, is not in and of itself a national security threat. It is a statement of principle and a perspective as to how the nation state should behave. It is a sense of pride in the nation state in and of itself. Again, I have problems with nationalism, but it's not a national security threat. And the fact that Joe Biden is treating this as a national security threat shows that he is in the business of attacking ideologies by labeling them threats to democracy. Where have we seen this before? Labeling them threats to democracy and then bringing them under the realm of national security. It's right here. I don't know how it will happen or whatever, but I'm telling you, it's right here. The implications are all over this thing. And when the government uses abstractions to justify arbitrary actions, it detaches itself from the moral rules of reality. Because reality, my friends, does have indeed those moral rules. Moral rules that we can observe and we understand are proper and just. But when the government creates this entirely different reality, redefines terms, makes national security abstract, and then moves things from reality into its sphere, which is supposedly detached from those morals of reality, it can set the terms. This is Biden creating his own Play-Doh-like reality right in front of us. Again, there are many more problems wrong with this guidance. I don't have forever. Unfortunately, I wish I did. There are many more problems wrong with this guidance. But there is a part of this guidance, because he goes on again eventually to explain, why all this stuff is bad and how democracies are important and how we need to chart a new course. So basically, this entire guidance is about how the previous administration didn't respond sufficiently, implicitly, to all these threats and how Biden is going to chart the new course, right? They even say on one of this part, to simplify this point, the work of executing Biden's idea of national security. This work is urgent because the alliances, institutions, agreements, and norms underwriting the international order of the United States helped establish are being tested amid rapid change and mounting crisis. Running beneath many of these broad trends is a revolution in technology that poses both peril and promise. The world's leading powers are racing to develop and deploy emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence and quantum computing, that could shape everything from the economic and military balance among states to the future of work, wealth, and inequality within them. And he goes on. One thing about this inequality being a threat. Inequality is not a threat to anything. Inequality is a definitive feature of reality. If you're going to have any kind of social interaction, any kind of existence, you're going to have inequality. There's a significant inequality of ability between me and Michael Jordan, and that's okay. Michael Jordan has his gifts, I have my gifts, and that should be prized, that should be appreciated. But the fact that now inequality, an unassailable fact of reality, is now being determined a national security threat, shows that Biden is really adopting what I would call a Gnostic, as Vogel would call it at least, a Gnostic goal here. His goal is to fundamentally shape the nature of things into his image by making them national security threats. And there's a significant danger to that, my friends. You cannot try to secure something without you yourself having a secure foundation in the language of reality. But unfortunately, this guidance doesn't have that. And the part that concerned quite a lot of people was the section here on economic justice as well. He says, as we make good on our promises to place the American people and especially working families at the center of our national security strategy, our policies must reflect a basic truth. In today's world, economic security is national security, and the strength of the American middle class, the backbone of this nation, is a long-standing advantage. For that reason, our trade and international economic policies must serve all Americans, not just the privileged few. Not just the privileged few. Whatever that means. Again, he doesn't really examine how he is going to have that have any action. What he does say is that we will ensure the growth we promote through our international commercial trade and investment policies is durable and equitable. How? How can you do that? We will work with our allies to reform the World Trade Organization so that it functions to support American jobs and the values we have with millions around the world, including labor rights, equal opportunity, and environmental stewardship. So again, he's going to use international institutions and bend them towards his political will, and presuming all of his political ideas are correct on his part, he's going to try to inflict them upon everyone else. This is Biden's national security policy, that he's going to pursue equity in trade. What does that mean? Trade is inherently inequitable because guess what? One nation has more of something and the other nation has more of something. One nation is better at something, the other is better or worse at something. It's called comparative and absolute advantage, and these come into trade. Again, Biden's blowing up foundations here. He's blowing them up at their root, and he's trying to say that it's going to help people. It's not. Again, there are so many examples of this in this guidance. I can't get to all of them today. So he's going to push economic justice by blowing up the foundations of how certain of these things work. And also, he's going to build back better. Again, he says, central to this agenda is building an equitable, clean, and resilient energy future, which is urgently required to head off the existential threat posed by climate change. So now climate policy is national security. I mean, there's nothing. Here's the point. Biden is taking the term national security and he's filling it up with all of his political pet projects. And he's existentializing all of these ideas. The idea of there being inequity is not inherently a bad thing, nor is it a threat to anything. The only thing that it's quote-unquote a threat to is the sensibilities of people who lack natural understanding. It's the sensibility of people who lack the understanding of how these things actually work in reality. Another thing here that's bad. Building back better requires us to commit ourselves to revitalizing our own democracy. America's ideas of democracy, equality, and diversity are a fundamental and enduring source of advantage, but they are not a given. Embracing that advantage means leading up to the founding promises of our nation, strengthening and renewing our democratic processes and ideas, and demonstrating our actions that democracy is essential to meeting the challenges of our time. So essentially, he's going to take his idea of democracy, presume that's what the condition of America, what it is not, and he's going to use them to as a metric of how well we're doing in national security. Why is a political system that we don't even have being used to measure American national security? Again, this plan is entirely divorced from reality. This plan is entirely divorced from reality, and I am just astounded that this is being considered national security. Then here is the final thing that makes people really upset, and this is what got it for me. This is what did it for me. Biden says, because traditional distinctions between foreign policy and domestic policy, and among national security, economic security, health security, and environmental security are less meaningful than ever before, we will reform and rethink our nations. We will reform and rethink our agencies, departments, interagency processes, and White House organization to reflect this reality. We will ensure that individuals with expertise in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, economics, and finance in critical languages and regions are fully integrated into our decision making. We will develop new processes and partnerships to ensure that state, municipal, tribal, civil society, nonprofit, diaspora, faith-based, and private sectors are better integrated into policy deliberations, and we will develop new mechanisms to coordinate policy and information across this diverse set of stakeholders. Because traditional distinctions between foreign policy and domestic policy are less meaningful than ever before, he is now going to use, this is the kicker, you're going to blend them both together and have them be one and the same. Let me say this before I read Governor DeSantis' statement. If there is no distinction between two distinct categories that have their own implications and their own natures, and those things become one and the same, and they are blended together syncretically, artificially, by a government, this is simply the foundation for the government to expand its jurisdiction, expand its scope of abilities, expand its ability to do certain things, and then enact whatever its political will might be. That is not national security. That is national mendacity of the highest order. And the fact that this is being masqueraded as something to protect us underlies the fact, or belies the fact rather, that the highest protection comes in the securing of rights. And the securing of rights comes in government knowing where its proper place is. And the fact that government has clearly stepped over the line in this case by considering domestic policy and foreign policy to be one and the same, and therefore saying government has to get involved, that shows that we are not truly secure. We are in national existential danger if this plan makes it to, it's already in effect, but if it makes it to its formal national security strategy, things are even worse. Things are even worse. All right, everybody. So to close out this show, we have the exclusive that you all have been waiting for, the statement from the office of Governor Ron DeSantis, who gave this exclusively to Pensive Politics. I am so grateful to his press secretary, Christina Pushaw. I'm grateful to Governor DeSantis. I'm grateful to all of them. DeSantis, I don't care what you think about him. I think he is objectively one of the best governors that America has right now in terms of defending liberties and rights and understanding the proper rule of government. And I really believe that if it was a DeSantis national security strategy, this entire deal would look different. I genuinely believe that, just based on his actions. So here is the statement released on the guidance. I just read parts of the guidance to you. This is the statement released on the guidance from the office of Governor Ron DeSantis. The statement says this. It begins. Rights are God-given, and in our Constitution, the states are the primary vehicles to protect people's rights and freedoms. In Florida, Governor DeSantis has led the way in defending our rights, from federal overreach. For example, he successfully fought back against unconstitutional vaccine mandates imposed by federal bureaucrats. He has enacted unprecedented protections for parents' rights to direct the upbringing of their own children without government interference or indoctrination. And the state of Florida has sued the Biden administration to stop the destructive, unlawful catch and release policy that allows countless illegal aliens to pour into our state. It is ironic the Biden administration's interim guidance on national security does not offer proposals that would address the number one national security threat to our country, the Biden border crisis. The humanitarian crisis at the uncontrolled border is devastating our country while enriching transnational organized crime groups, including narcotics traffickers, drug cartels, sex traffickers, and human smugglers. Deadly drugs like fentanyl have flooded across the open border into our communities, and tragically, the number one cause of death today among ages 18 to 45 is fentanyl overdose. That's correct. Fentanyl and other illicit drugs trafficked across the border are killing Floridians every day. Illegal aliens with criminal backgrounds or stolen identities have also entered our communities and murdered Floridians. The open border is an existential crisis for our country, and the Biden administration seems content to pretend it is not happening. The term social justice is a red flag because it denotes Marxist ideology of collective guilt. Just as every individual has God-given rights, justice should also be a concept that applies to individuals, not collective blocks or identity groups. She is absolutely correct. I'll get more into this in a second. When an individual commits a crime, justice may be served if the individual is caught and prosecuted. But groups of people should not be punished collectively for the crimes of some of their members, or vice versa, as the concept of social justice suggests. Therefore, the Biden administration's emphasis on this phrase and the national security interim guidance is troubling, to say the least. Governor DeSantis will continue to do everything in his power to defend Floridians' constitutional rights from any potential threats, including the threat of federal government overreach. So we have a national security strategy encroaching upon society, potentially threatening federalism by encroaching upon society in such an egregious manner, by trying to blend domestic policy and foreign policy together, even though both of them have radically different implications, and one clearly requires more government intervention than the second, foreign policy. So the implication is very clear. This is a governor that is saying, if this comes to my state, I am going to fight. Name me one. That's the spirit of Paul Revere, of John Jay, of Thomas Jefferson. Name me one other governor in this nation that has even considered thinking about this, much less releasing a statement saying, if this comes to my state, I'm fighting. I'm going to protect the people of my state from government overreach. That is a beautiful sentiment. And I think Governor DeSantis, I think Ms. Pushaw, I hope I'm saying your name right. I think all of them. Thank you so much. Because Americans need to hear this. Americans need to hear that there is a warrior there willing to fight for their indivisible natural rights, the rights this country was founded upon. I mentioned a few moments ago that justice is not, I mentioned that I agree with her that justice is not collective. It's not. Justice is an individual trait that an individual action that can happen between two or more people, but it doesn't happen on a societal level. And so the fact that there's a governor in America willing to emphasize that as well shows a profound understanding of the nature of concepts, the nature of terms, and therefore a correct understanding of how to go about understanding things, how to go about knowing things, epistemic rigor. Again, it's beautiful seeing that come from a governor's office here in America. So my friends, as I leave you guys, I'm sorry if the reading was sporadic and disjointed, but we got through it. And ultimately, I want you guys to understand something. The greatest security does not come from fighting for democracy. It does not come from beating climate change. It does not come from, securing racial justice. It does not come from fighting nationalism. The greatest security comes from self-reliance. And it comes from a government that respects your individual moral agency enough to refrain from infringing upon self-reliance. Refrain from infringing upon your ability to act in society. Unfortunately, this guidance demonstrates that this government is not interested in doing that. But that does not mean that you have to drop the ball as well. Be self-reliant, be a strong individual, and be someone who will say no to categorical intrusions upon American life like this one. Because when more people say no, we can beat back these kind of things. Not build back, but beat back these kind of initiatives. But if people simply lay down and take it, then I'm afraid the Republic is in peril. But I don't believe it is. I believe the Republic is just getting started, going into this new phase. And all of you, if you reject this, will be part of it. Think on it. My friends, thank you for joining me for this special episode of Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson. Come back every weekend, every Saturday, every Sunday. We'll be right back here. Same little desk here. Same person here. Same Christian Watson, with the philosophical stuff. We'll be right back here. I love you guys so much, and you please stay pensive. Bye, guys.